Welcome, everybody, to the Troubadour podcast. And today I have a special guest, Jeremiah Cobra. I always want to sing your first name. I'm sure you're used
Because
to
of the
that.
Bullfrog song?
Yeah, exactly.
So many songs.
But that's the one that sticks in my head. And Jeremiah had an outburst of creative activity that we're going to be able to experience today in painting and in his writing. You wrote a novel called
Yeah.
"And Then I Shot My Cousin,"
And then
which,
he
and
shot
then he
his
shot.
son.
Sorry. And then he shot his cousin.
It's told in first person
Yeah,
perspective.
that's why I'm thinking, because I'm all like, just so everybody knows, I'm like right at the end of this thing. So it'll be really of this book. So I am reading this and I'm not quite finished with it, but it'll be interesting to explore the book before, without spoiling the ending too much. Although we kind of know
Yeah.
the ending, and then he shot his cousin.
That's
So
my favorite part of the book. So
yeah,
I don't even know if I think I can articulate most of what was going on, but my favorite part of the book is that you already know how it's going to end.
yeah,
Well, that's not true. That's not entirely true. There's some surprises. But, I mean, you start off at the ending, and that's not unique. Other stories have done that. And
for sure.
then the journey is figuring out how you got there. And I think the journey in this particular case is more emotional than it is circumstantial. But I think I do think that there are some really interesting circumstances that he's placed in that leads him on the emotional journey. So, um, I am I allowed to express pride? I'm kind of proud of how I put this one together.
Yeah,
Writing is hard, man.
yeah, you are
Even if I
definitely
did
allowed.
it very quickly or fairly quickly, and there was an outburst, it was still hard, and it was there were still moments where I was pulling out whatever hair I have up there,
Yeah,
and
I did that a long
yeah,
time ago.
so yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah, it's so yeah, I mean, let's talk about the actual content a little bit without spoiling it.
Hmm.
I do think it is it fits into a particular genre,
Hmm.
and it has, and it might even be somewhat of a new genre. I mean, you didn't invent it, but it's a new genre in the sense that there is a mystery, but the
Hmm.
mystery isn't what happened, it's why it happened, right? And this is
Right.
something that you do see in a lot of mystery novels, and you see this in movies and TV shows where, like you said, it does start with there was this murder, or I just started watching this TV show Goliath, and it starts with this big explosion, and we're trying to figure
Hmm.
out all the mysteries that go along with it. Now,
Right.
yours is a mystery. I think you have kind of what I call the heart of a romanticist. The mystery is the internal world of the person that led to this event, this action. That's what I'm
Right.
assuming from reading, almost 80% at this point
Right.
of the story. Is it's kind of that expression.
Right.
And when I was reading it, one of the things that came to my mind, how familiar are you at all familiar with William Wordsworth, the poet?
I am.
Okay, so he has a term that I love called spots of time.
Okay.
And he wrote an autobiographical poem called The Prelude, and and basically he's looking back at his from childhood into his
Hmm.
current into his adult life, into his 30s, and what led him to be, he called it, the theme was the growth of a poet's mind. But it was
Hmm.
exploring his own memories, and he called it spots of time. They're like these moments that really stick out. Now this
Hmm.
isn't, and then he shot his cousin is not an autobiography, I hope.
No, 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 no.
But
That's my biggest fear is that I hope no one thinks. Obviously, I don't think anyone's going to think I shot someone, but uh,
how
it's
closely?
so far from anything I've ever personally been through. Like,
Yeah.
uh, maybe only in very broad abstractions can I relate to the character. But in terms of actions, it's nothing like.
Yeah,
Never
not the
did it.
the concrete
Never pointed a
events.
gun at anybody.
Yeah.
I only fired my first gun like 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, it's the reason I'm bringing this up is not that the autobiography a point, but
Right.
the story you wrote does feel like it's a spots of time
Hmm.
type of a book that
Hmm.
pick out these incredible moments in this young
Hmm.
man's life
Right.
that I'm going to assume leads to the shooting of
Hmm.
his cousin, right? Which is the
Right.
title. And
Right.
it is a kind of exploratory, um, novel that explores that inner world and the events that led to that. But it's
Right.
my point is that it's a little bit different than like a straight linear narrative where
Hmm.
it starts on Monday, the 21st, and it ends on, the following 29th or whatever, right?
Right.
And,
Right.
and so it's not that kind of linearity, but it is linear
No,
in terms of the events that lead up to it,
it
which
does
I
happen in
like.
order, but yes, there are big leaps. Like, yeah, it well, I don't want to spoil too much in terms of even the time because the way I structured the first few chapters are something that I want the reader to discover. So, but yes, it definitely happens in order, and it's definitely linear in that way.
Yeah. And I so one thing that really another thing that stuck out to me that I really enjoyed was the um maturity of the writing, actually. In terms of not, that you're an adult now, but that there was a fluidity that I
Hmm.
think wasn't there as much in some of your earlier works that I've read. As much. Like you've improved, in
Yeah.
other words. And like
Well,
go ahead.
that's my proudest achievement on this book
Yeah.
is that a couple of things. One, I think I got out of you say get out of your own way.
Yeah.
This book really came to me without a lot of effort in terms of trying to figure out how a story should go. Um, and I'm not sure if that's the clearest way to put it, but um, I've had you know what it really was? Okay, the stories definitely, like the story of it definitely came to me first. And I think with some of my past work, the themes came first, and then I was
Ah,
trying to figure out what good stories would work in some of these themes. And and that's always been the trick or the thing for me to learn how to do is tell the story for that's what I've been telling myself anyways. No one's particularly told me that, but it's always been the thing I've known that I've needed to get better at as a writer is how to tell the story first and let the story tell the theme by itself, so to speak. And so yeah, I definitely think um, I grew a bit, probably a lot in that regard.
yeah,
I'm
and
really
the
excited about the
character is also
book.
very full.
Hmm.
The primary character, and one of my this is not a way that you can analyze art, I don't think, but it's one personal experience I have when I'm reading art that I actually enjoy. And
Hmm.
that's when I'm reading the story,
Hmm.
do I get lost into it to the point where I am actually imagining, taking a moment, pausing, imagining other words I wish he would say in a moment, right? Because he's real. And it's just like if you're watching a friend talk to a girl and you're like, no, you're saying, what are you talking about? Like, say that you're saying stupid stuff. And it's like,
Right.
but that's who he is, right? That's who that person is. And he's nervous. And that's the reality of it. I'm the
Absolutely.
outsider being able to look inward and in on his world. And that's
Right.
so my point is that that's one of the signs that I look for in a work of art, in a novel, in a short story, that it's real and the person is real, or there's a reality to him and a fullness to him that
Hmm.
I'm like, no, 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 don't do that, right? Or don't say that, or like in other words, this is an empathy project or
Right.
thing
Right.
where I'm actually going in there and seeing what he's like because I have a sense of this
Hmm.
full of the totality of this character and the different ways that he would react in situations like, put down the ball, man. What are you doing? Like stuff
I
like
mean,
that. But I understood where he was
yeah.
coming from in that moment, right? I got what
Right.
was happening in
Right.
those moments. Just a little teaser with the
No,
magic of the
absolutely.
ball.
That's the corner to turn as an artist. And I don't know what all of the different in terms of creating art. I don't know what all of the different phases are um, in terms of becoming good at something and creating the right thing. But firstly, I definitely felt like I turned a corner, not just with that, but with all of the art that I kind of do in general. But yeah, if I can, the goal is always to get the reader to lose themselves in the character.
Yeah.
And my favorite thing about this book, I think with even the minor characters, I think as a writer, I was able to lose myself in them. Like it felt like to some extent to the extent that I was writing from first person, I felt like I was talking to those characters.
Yeah.
And then from the extent that I was creating those characters, I felt like I knew what those characters, like it wasn't me saying what I would say in that
Yeah.
experience and or in that circumstance. It really felt like I knew what those writers were saying. I think um, as a writer, it's an achievement to get to. I don't know what practice it takes to do that, or what goes on in creative writing classes if they teach that kind of thing. But
I
I'm
don't think they
definitely
do.
proud of that, being able to get to that with these characters in this book.
Yeah, I think the only way to do that is to write and read a lot. I think you have to write and write and write and see it
Hmm.
over and over again and get distance from it. You know, I just went through the experience of self-publishing my novel that I wrote years ago,
Hmm.
just because I wanted to get it out of my system. Because
Right.
and there's and I see a lot of the flaws in it, in the sense
Sure.
that it was he's a kind of outrageous character. He's not fully real.
Hmm.
There's something about him that's missing.
Is this the
A
book? Is
to-
this the book?
Once more
Uh,
around the infinite. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Which I still think is
Is that out
okay,
now?
but what's that?
Is that out
Yeah,
now?
it's out. Which
Oh,
I'm not
oh,
like gonna crap on it, but I'm proud of what I accomplished. I think there is a totality to it, but there is a
right.
sense of I wrote it when I was like 27,
Hmm.
and there's a sense of something that's kind of missing, and part of it was, like you said, I was going after. I had a theme, and
Hmm.
I had something I really wanted to say, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I
Hmm.
had something I really wanted to say, and then I found the concretes that I could think of to say
Hmm.
that thing. And
Hmm.
that may be right, but I think as you get older and you experience more things in life, for one, I think that's an
Hmm.
important part of it, is you're able to more, if you practice this skill. This
Hmm.
is my opinion. I'm not a, renowned author, so don't take my word for it. But just my opinion is there's a kind of closeness to between a movement that you can do between the specific events and the imagery and the meaning you're
Hmm.
trying to get across that
Hmm.
happens as you grow up, and you see these events playing out in your real life, over time, for instance, which is something that is hard to do when you're younger. Just
Absolutely.
yeah,
I, in many ways, that makes me envy the young writers even more that they got, because I mean, not every writer, right? But there are some legendary writers, and I'm sure there are writers out there now in their 20s who are just writing extraordinary depictions of reality. And it's just like, man, you got that at 23. And the first thought that comes to mind is I finally read
I was
Bugs Are
thinking the
Gone.
same
We haven't
thing.
talked about that. He wrote
Yeah,
that when he was 17. Victor
I
Hugo wrote
know.
that when he was 17
And
years
that's
old.
insane.
That
Bug
book is
Charcoal.
amazing.
I know. But I do think this is a, to what you do, on a day to day basis with education. I do think education has a lot to do with it. He's
Hmm.
obviously a giant and a genius,
Hmm.
and he has a craft. He's good at his craft. But this is not somebody who, like me, I take myself as my education started after I graduated from high school, right? When I was 18. Like that's when it
Right.
started. Everything before that was, so it's taken me almost 17 years to get to
Hmm.
the point where I can write something decent, I think, and have control. Whereas I think he had a good education system, or he had a good education, not a system. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, if you're learning Latin and Greek and you
Hmm.
can speak multiple languages and you're writing all the time, I think it's
Hmm.
very powerful. Um, so now the flip side is hopefully we'll all live a little longer, but
Here's something to add to that though, because on the one hand, so first of all, I don't want to crap on any of my earlier work either, and I only have one book out there, so no one really knows what the earlier stuff really even means. Uh,
yeah,
I definitely love those books. I love that last book with the short stories. I definitely look at some of those stories now and think what I could do differently. I think every writer probably does that, which is
yeah,
I've read various articles where so many writers don't even like to read their earlier work because you
yeah.
just as you grow. Um,
Hit those
in the
milestones and
craft,
then
you
look
just
back.
yeah, you
Yeah,
just know what you could have done better, and again, this is a in many ways, you and I both can argue that we're self-taught writers. Now, we have,
yeah,
unless you've taken some creative writing. I've never taken a creative writing
no,
class. I've
I haven't.
taken writing classes before, and I think that's very different. I think that the biggest journey for me over maybe the past 8 years has been discovering there's so many things you can learn that you need to learn how to do to write a story, so
Yeah.
that I would immediately validate the existence of any creative writing course or degree you can get. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge there that you must learn how to do, whether it's developing a character or writing dialogue that feels real, or crafting a setting using simile. Like, and there are various levels to it. And I think I'm just not kind of getting my head around that. But having said all that, I this story was partly inspired by a it's not even a short story, it's like a blurb, it's like a scene I wrote when I was 22.
Hmm.
I was going through my pads because I kept them all because I felt like I was going to be famous one day.
I did the same
I'm not.
thing. I
But
had
you know what's
boxes of
even
stuff.
the
Everyone's
pretentiousness
gonna
of
want
it?
this one
The
day.
pretentiousness of it is I kept them in like these beautiful notepads that
Yeah.
someone's going to discover. No, nobody
Yeah.
cares. But I spent so much money on those pads, and so I still have
Yeah.
them. And I was just going through, and most of it is garbage.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's so bad.
This
But
stream of consciousness stuff and
but there was this one scene, and honestly, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the story, and except that I really thought that 22-year-old me set that scene up really well. There was just I think it's about a page and a half, and it's about. This is what made I told some friends about this, and they thought that this book was going to be way darker than it was based on this depiction. But it's a scene about this girl who's dying,
yeah.
or it's actually ambiguous whether she's dying. She's in the back of a car. She cannot move. She thinks she's wondering if she's dying, and all she can hear are people in the background wondering what to do with the car and the body.
Oof.
And so it's rough, right? It's dark, right? That's what 22-year-old me was on. But it was like I think she was the thing she was noticing, the thing she noticed was really something I zeroed in on in that little passage. She's noticing the shimmering light on the street. There was a rain that was falling. Some of this might sound familiar if you've already started reading the book.
Hmm.
And then but there was the aspect that she couldn't move, and then there's this dialogue happening behind her, and then it just stops. It never turned into a story or anything like that. And I was just reading that, and I was like, a lot of things came together at the same time. There was that, and then there was the watercolor painting that I had done, and
Which is the cover of your
which is the
book.
cover. Yeah,
And then
this
he
is
shot his
yeah the cover.
cousin.
Yeah, this is if you open the whole book, the whole painting is
Oh, okay, cool.
actually
So I'm
there.
I'm
Yeah,
waiting to get my book. I want my book.
yeah, yeah. It's
I've been
coming.
reading the
It's coming.
PDF or the Kindle version,
The
which is
Kindle version. Yeah, it's on its way. That took longer getting them. Come back to that.
publication.
So it was the watercolor.
Yeah.
It was that little kind of blurb that I came across when I came up with when just wanted an idea of a story to write, and there was something else off the top of my head, um, but all of it kind of came together immediately, and I was like, oh, this is the story. Things that came into play afterwards, I actually went and started watching The Wire
Good
because I
show.
kind of yeah I had never seen it before, but
Oh,
I
I think it's a
felt
good show.
say that again.
I think it's a good show. I don't know if you do.
I think it is too. I think it's a great show. I don't think I would watch it. It is dark.
Oh yeah, super dark.
It is dark, and I don't. Yeah, we can talk about that either later or another time. But the importance of it to me is that I needed to. Once I knew what I wanted my story to be about,
Yeah.
I needed to go back to like the rougher parts of the neighborhoods that I'd grown up in,
Uh-huh.
and I wasn't going to go to Hartford. No, no, Hartford's. I'm not shitting on Hartford. I'm just.
But that's where you're
I
from?
couldn't. I couldn't go anyways, right? Because of the quarantine and
Quarantine,
all that.
yeah.
So,
You had to go in your
uh,
mind.
yeah, well, yeah. So I needed something that could put me back there, and I think Baltimore in that movie or in that series is
Yeah.
far more grim than anything I saw in Hartford. But Hartford is rough, and
Is it?
if you from Hartford, if you're from Hartford, you know. So if you know, you know. I've been listening to a lot of different hip hop. If you know, you know. Everybody who's from Hartford that watches this podcast knows what I'm talking about. And the thing about Hartford is that, first of all, there are beautiful parts, and Hartford in general, like Connecticut in general, is beautiful. And I think you can, in many ways, say that about a lot of different places where, like, you don't want to just, crap on New York because of some of the places that are dangerous. New York is a beautiful city. I'm sure
Yeah.
you can go to Baltimore and have a sense of life that's like no other. But the thing about Hartford is that it's generally so quiet. Like there's certain
Mm.
hoods in Hartford I could take you to in the daytime, and you just be like, "What goes on here?
Yeah.
Looks quiet. Nothing goes on now. Wait till the sun goes down. It's different,
Yeah.
different, very starkly
Different
different
life.
areas." So, yeah, and so yeah, but so The Wire helped me get there. I went back and started listening to Tupac. Tupac is a genius, man. I knew that, but I didn't. And I listened to music that I hadn't really heard of before. You hear him, he always gets put into the conversation of greatest lyricists of all time. And before I really listened to him, I was just like, how do you even compare him to Biggie? That's also my East Coast bias. So you can't compare Tupac to Biggie. Some people are going to get mad at me now. I get it now. That's all I'm going to say is I get it now. He has one rap song that's all alliteration, and I don't know another rapper that does that. It's like it's alliteration. All of the lines start
Yeah.
with the same, like, and it's an incredible. I think it's called it's called "If I Die Tonight," which is
I've heard
dark,
that.
but the writing is amazing. So it's like I was listening to that.
Yeah, I've
Um,
heard him called a real poet, like a genuine
but
poet,
he's a legitimate poet. Like,
which I would
look,
be interested in, maybe I'll explore his poetry on like as poetry and see how it stands
yeah,
up.
I mean, well, I
Be
think he
interesting.
probably, I think he has poetry, like published poetry. But even if you like that song, "If I Die Tonight," if you just listen to, I don't think that you're gonna be blown away by the subject matter. This his subject matter is what it is. He's talking about, hood things happening, and just kind of has that dark vibe to it. But the writing is amazing. You show me someone in the comments or whatever, someone show me another rapper that uses alliteration for an entire song
Yeah.
and does it that well. And even though he had to know what alliteration was, he used it. So that's another thing. It's one of those big literary words that there's probably a
Or
bunch
he
of
just had a
rappers.
really good sense of language and what
Man,
sounded, interesting and, having those, first sounds the same over, and staying with that could be something that,
it's
I
so
do think
consistent.
great
I don't think
poets,
he did it from just a sense of knowing it. I think he had to
you think he
know
had a
it.
conscious control of his
He had
craft?
to. It's so purposeful, and it happens
Okay.
throughout the
Yeah,
song.
man. I'm not saying he didn't. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm just saying I think it's possible for, intelligent people to not be necessarily,
versed in
educated,
the.
and he may not know what it's called, but he, in terms of like, oh, this is the technical term.
I
But
mean, he did go to an art school though.
oh, okay. So yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know much
he's a
about.
studied artist. He went in Baltimore,
Okay.
interestingly enough.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So you're watching The
studied
Wire,
it.
made you think
Hmm.
of, and you're trying to get some, while you're trapped in quarantine, trying to get some perspective on this world that you're creating that came from a sketchbook that you wrote when you were 22. And you wrote this
Yeah,
sketch
yeah, yeah. It's a
of
page-long sketch.
page long sketch of something and this event of this scary woman. What,
Uh,
one thing that was, you were saying that was, made me think of something personally when you were talking about you were dark. That's where you were when you were 22.
hmm
And, it's interesting that when I was 22, and that it feels like we flipped. So when I was in my 20s, I was writing all these benevolent stories about treasure hunters falling in love, and I had one dark piece, and like their wives secretly sending them on a treasure
uh-huh.
hunt that really leads to their bedroom so they can have sex with them, like that. That's the whole, like all these stories like that.
My stories were dark. I can't even. I'm almost embarrassed to show you something. It's dark.
Well, but here's the
It's
thing is, so this is why I think we switched though. Over the last couple of years, the stories that I've been writing, especially what I've written in quarantine are
Mm-hmm.
really dark, are pretty
Uh-huh.
dark psychologically. They go
Uh-huh.
into madness and chaos and murder and death.
Uh-huh.
And it's, so it's been interesting, thinking about my own artistic journey from these
Uh-huh.
kind of light stories. I mean, once more around the novel, once more around the infinite is,
Uh-huh.
it's got some darkness to it. He's in a dark place, but it
Uh-huh.
he comes out of it at least. That's the idea, right?
Right.
There is a way out at least.
Right.
But in some of this other stuff, it's, inside, although I'm writing from third person, it's inside the mind of a madman, a psychopath, or a murderer or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
really harsh, for the most part. I mean, I have one that I just released a novelette called
Mm-hmm.
Old Man Traveling. Quarantine Tales, Old Man Traveling. It's just an old man trying to get through this quarantine to get somewhere. And it's all these
You
different
you
perspectives.
released that?
Yeah, it's on troubadourmag.com.
Okay,
It's not a
I'm
long
gonna
one,
check
but it's
that
a
out.
novelette. But anyway, so
Okay.
it's definitely a pretty dark story. It's not like horrific in some sense, but it's pretty dark in a lot of ways. Just
Sure.
so different than what I wrote earlier. And you've reversed, like you've gone more optimistic. So I was wondering, maybe we could, be interested in your experiences with quarantine, because I was already on a darkened trend because of, for a variety of reasons I get into. And then quarantine happened and I went like, boom, like, into the pits and despair of
Yeah,
hell.
dark
And I was like, this is,
quarantine brought out a lot of stuff in a lot of people. I'm glad it brought out more productivity than not because
yeah.
um, I don't know. I think that uh, first of all, I definitely went to a kind of dark place, and any of my friends who tried to do like a Zoom happy hour with me knows that I wasn't feeling it at all. I was, but
I
but
want to
I was
meet
just
people in
like,
person. I don't want to
but
do
I
this
just did,
Zoom
I
thing.
didn't want to perpetuate it. I was just
That was
like, no,
my feeling. Yeah.
they win
Yeah.
if we do a Zoom happy hour. They win. Whoever they is, it's like they win. No,
I
if it's
agree.
not in
Yeah.
person, I don't want to do it.
That's how I
Uh,
felt. Yeah.
Part of that, but yeah, part of that is me being curmudgeon. I don't want to. I have a very, I guess, weird personality. I can be very light and I'm in general very happy. And I think I've always been that way. Like I was always a pretty happy child growing up as well. Um, and but then I can definitely have dark moments, and I think in general I'm sure I'm going to be like a curmudgeony old man unless. Well, yeah, I think I'm just gonna be one of those get off my lawn type of old men. So it was
You
one of
think so?
those.
I don't know. I don't see
Yeah,
that.
because I'm already like that. Like
Oh, okay.
I'm a terrible driver in that. Like I'm a great driver. I'm a great driver, and everyone else is terrible around
Oh, well, that's true though. Probably.
me.
I feel like
It
that's
can't be that true. I
can't be
mean,
that
whatever.
true.
I'm at least aware of
Most
myself.
people are
I'm
pretty stupid.
yeah.
And one thing I've learned on riding with, I ride a motorcycle now. And
Yeah,
one thing I've learned is it actually is a good idea to just assume everybody's a moron, because that puts you in the position of being alert and just
yeah,
because you don't have enough information to make the
yeah.
assessment that this is actually a NASCAR driver and nothing I do would, perturb their ability to flow forward in the movement of traffic.
Right.
But if I assume that and then they turn out to be a drunken moron that crashes right into me, and kills me, well, that's my fault, right? Like, so I think you're fine, keep their curmudgeonly, but just make sure you keep open that people can prove that they're not morons. That's one way
That's
to,
a moron until proven otherwise. That's rough, man.
that's
I don't.
my, well, on the road, at least, that's my perspective on the road.
Yeah, I don't think I've gone that far, but I definitely curse at people when I drive.
Oh,
It's like
wow.
you don't like
Okay.
in my mind and sometimes aloud. I have some friends who know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah. Anyways, back to quarantine. So I will say this though. I'm definitely one of those people that didn't whose life did not change much with the quarantine. Like you
Oh,
see those
really?
memes, yeah, those memes where it's just like, what does it mean when your life doesn't really change because of the quarantine? Like, and I think I can be more introverted than I think people imagine I am. Because when I'm out, and I enjoy being out, and I enjoy being around people and doing that. But I actually if I'm not out, if I'm not, I can pretty much say this to anyone with whom I hang out with or spend tremendous amount of time, they should know that if I'm not hanging out with them, I'm probably at home. So
Yeah.
just count all the
You're not
time
hanging out
between
somewhere
when you
else
last
trying to
say
avoid
that
them.
again.
You're not hanging
Say
out
that again.
somewhere else trying to avoid them.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not hanging out with somebody else. I'm not hanging out with somebody else. Like my circle of friends is fairly small, and if I'm not hanging out with you, or you feel like it's been a long time since we hung out, it's probably been a long time of me being in my house, not just like out, ignoring you or something like that. And so in many ways, I
So
was
I thought
ready
you've
for
been
the
ignoring me
quarantine.
for 5 years. What the heck's going on?
Hey, man, you got your motorcycle. You ran away to Texas first, and then
California, Northern California. No, no, I'm just
you're in
saying. I'm
Northern
just saying.
California now, but weren't you in
I was
Texas
in
like 3
Texas
years?
for a couple of years. Yeah, San
Yeah,
Antonio.
yeah,
Yeah,
you went there first. You're not up the street anymore, man. That's your
I
fault.
know. I do miss. I
um,
do miss Southern California a little bit, but anyway.
yeah. So with the quarantine, I don't. There was definitely a moment where I went, just fairly kind of despondent about everything that was going on, and I think I definitely kind of wrote the book. I mean, it should be noted, I wrote the book in a weekend, and I definitely like the
But did
first
you have a
draft.
plan for it ahead of time, or did you just like had this character in the
No,
sketch and you started writing
I
and
just
went to
started
it? Right.
writing. I
Interesting.
kind of outlined it in my head. There is no genuine outline anywhere, which is another different thing for me when it comes to writing books,
Yeah.
because I definitely subscribe to the notion that you should outline, especially if it's a bigger project. This is only about 23,000 words. It's more of a novella, definitely a novella, on a smaller end of a novella.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was small enough that I could write it without an outline. It also just came out of me very quickly, so that I didn't necessarily need an outline. I kind of knew what stories I wanted to tell and how to get the character from where he is, let's say in the second chapter, to getting to a point where he needs, might have to murder his cousin, or has to shoot his cousin. Um, and all of that kind of came very quickly for me. Um,
But you
and
did have
that
the ending.
Well, that's probably what made it easier.
Yeah, you had the ending.
I'll tell you. So there two things to know. One, I definitely knew the ending in that. Like I knew I was going to call it. Uh, I knew he was going to shoot his cousin. Like I knew that. Like I knew that ending.
Cousin's got to go.
Cousin's got to go.
Cousin's got to go.
And then I
No,
knew I
not
was
really.
working my way to that. And so I don't know if that's going to be a different process for me, even if I don't put the ending at the beginning and then work around like that. So it definitely helped. I've written other projects where I knew more of the theme, or I knew the character, or I knew just like a certain scene, and then I had to figure out the ending through outlining and all of that. And those have taken me much longer and have been less formed in my mind. So I think a big part of this is that it is a shortest project. I think the fact that um, I knew what I wanted to have happen at the end, that I knew that early on, helped me know what to have going
Yeah.
towards that end.
Well, that's why they say begin with the end in mind. It
Yeah,
really
and
helps.
I haven't written a lot of projects like that. And then
You have not?
um, no, I have not.
Oh,
And so
really? So you didn't
maybe
have the
that's
ending in your mind in most of your earlier stuff.
no,
Oh, that's
no,
interesting. Okay.
no. I've rarely had the ending in mind.
Okay.
Um, so that was a big difference with this story. And then it's also worth pointing out, I wrote the rough draft in 2 weeks. And that 2 week, I mean, sorry, I wrote the rough draft in a weekend, and I basically went through the editing in about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that rough draft was written during like my lower moment during the quarantine. Like I was in a darker mood
Yeah.
during when I wrote that. And then I have to say that the ending that I had in mind when I finished the rough draft, and the ending that I have in the book are fairly different. They're quite different. I'll have to have a
Interesting.
discussion with you off camera about how different they are.
Oh,
All
okay.
I and I won't even tell you whether one was darker than the other or not. I'll just say that the actual ending that's there now came on like it came during the editing. It came when I was
Interesting.
going through making sure the development was crisp,
Yeah.
and actually it really came um, after, yeah. It was one it the ending that's there now was one of the last things I did before I started line editing. So yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's a very interesting process. I know in terms of not writing with the ending. I know
Mhm.
that that's very common among writers that I've talked to. I mean I don't think it's common among. I'll be perfectly honest. Like the more when I read about the more successful authors, one of the
Mhm.
big pieces of advice that I always have seen is begin with the end in mind.
Mhm.
And so that's personally that's something I've always done. I've been fascinated with why or how anybody even starts without the end in mind. Like I always
Mhm.
know what the ending is going to be. Now maybe the rest of it's crap, leading up to it, but at least I know what it's going to be, and that helps me with it. Um,
Yeah,
what
that might
is
be great advice. Maybe that's why this one worked. Honestly, I feel like I just turned this writing this book in the period of time that I wrote it completely changed my perspective on what I'm capable of.
well one of the
Like I feel
pieces
like I
of
can do two more of these before the year's out, and I probably will.
oh good
More than
yeah I
likely
hope
will.
you do.
Yeah.
No keep it. I mean keep it up and so I mean I don't know what and works. I have my theories, just like I think every writer has their theories.
Hmm.
Maybe they don't express them. Maybe they don't like to
Hmm.
talk about them. Actually,
Hmm.
Edgar Allan Poe has a really interesting essay
Hmm.
on this topic on composition and on inspiration, and he calls
Hmm.
inspiration basically humbug, BS. He doesn't believe
Oh,
great writers really have it. They ponder and posture as though there's oh, I was like sitting and struck by this thing. But his whole thing is like you can actually use, and he goes through I think it's the art of composition. Um
hmm.
and he actually talks about the scientific way in which he approached writing The Raven, the
Mm.
poem The Raven, how it was very
Hmm.
and he talks about it very interesting. I really recommend writers read that
Hmm.
story or
Mm.
that essay. And it applies to his short stories as well. And I think a lot of writers, um, especially pre-modern writers, had a much more appreciation of craft
Hmm.
than I think today. Because a lot of the advice, like I went to film production school and I did take writing classes in terms of screenwriting classes, and we did do, it
Hmm.
was creative writing in a certain sense. So I guess I did do that. And the advice that they give, the dominant advice that I have heard from, I would say, when you don't read biographies of writers and read about writers that are really
Hmm.
successful, so like the people that are teaching us, that's interesting.
Hmm.
The teachers now don't always give, I think, the best advice
Mm.
is what they say is let the uh, character guide you. Let the character go where he goes, right? So create a
Hmm.
character and follow the character wherever he goes. And I have heard
Okay.
some writers say that they do that. Um, but I've noticed that, and maybe that works for them. I think that, can work depending on the type of
I mean,
mind
I
the
guess it
person
depends
has.
on the book they're writing too. I mean,
Definitely depends on the book they're writing. I'd be,
because what was it? Was it William Faulkner, The Sound and the
yeah,
Fury?
like stream of consciousness stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd let that character take him wherever he wanted because that
Go
book
wherever he
is all over
goes.
the place, right? So
I have
I'm sure.
avoided reading him, so I've not read Faulkner, so I can't really
Yeah, I actually
attack
was
him
in a
much.
position where I had to teach that book because I
Oh
was
wow.
working at it. My first teaching job was a long-term substitute position, and I did an AP Lit class.
Oh, okay. And they made you
Uh,
teach that.
and well, I mean, it was on the curriculum.
It was on the, yeah, yeah.
I wasn't. You don't have that kind of control over the curriculum, so I taught it. I will say I don't want the misconception that I sit down and start writing entire stories without knowing the ending.
Yeah.
Uh, I will definitely start writing per se before I know the ending. But what that will generally mean in the end is that I'll have to edit certain things to fit. The developmental edit
Yeah,
is
that makes
going to be a
sense.
very rigorous process. But I should also point out that I I know the ending by the time I sit down to write, but that's because but by the time I really get into writing a story, but that's because I've outlined my butt off to
Yeah.
figure out where I wanted that ending to be. And that's what I mean. That's the difference between that book and other books I've done and other stories I've done, published or not. And this one is that I already knew the ending here, so that I didn't really have to outline. The fact that it was shorter and the fact that I knew
Yeah.
the ending meant just kind of writing these episodes leading up to that ending because I already knew it. Uh, Once I have my outline and other projects, and including the novel that I still have a novel that's coming out, the slave narrative
Slave
that I
narrative.
put
Yeah.
that on hold. That was another thing that I wanted to say. I'll come back to that in just a second. But um, when I was writing that, I definitely had to like outline to get that to a point where I could say, okay, I'm going to say I know what I'm going to write.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And then write the
and so I knew the
segments.
ending, but it took like months of outlining before I knew that ending.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's
if
a
how's that as
challenge.
well.
I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and to kind of and I should say that it's important to differentiate between you have this ending in mind, and a lot of times it's just an image or a general idea of the ending, but it does
Hmm.
still take work, and so you are writing, and sometimes some of what you write may be a draft of something that you don't even realize is
Hmm.
a draft at the time. That
Sure.
is part of it, right? So it's like I have this ending of these two characters have to part at the end, right? And
Hmm.
so I get that, and I know these two characters, and now, well, how did they get there? Well, they were friends, and then they were lovers, and then they weren't lovers, blah blah. And you go through it, and that's like obviously super silly, but
Hmm.
at least not in terms of that interesting to read. Just two lovers that went through their journey. I mean, you can make it interesting, but um, so you are. I do think the part of the process for some writers, myself included, is
Hmm.
that as I'm writing, especially longer pieces,
Hmm.
that's the process. And um, in terms of you're writing a draft of something, and then you tweak the outline when you realize what it looks like in more vivid terms.
Hmm.
And so, before I do want to talk a little bit more about quarantine life, actually, but
Hold
before
on.
we
Before you get to that, I just wanted to interject something really quickly.
slave narrative,
Yeah, the Edgar Allan
yeah.
Poe point that inspiration is humbug, and I think I wrote something. I mean, I read something. I don't know. I feel like it's a few years ago that like it was a bunch of quotes on what a lot of writers thought about inspiration. And I think they probably all amount to the same thing, except one of them said something to the lines of, I do need to feel inspired to write, so I just make sure I'm always inspired."
Yeah.
And so that required, just having a life filled with whatever the things are that inspire him. I think that resonated more with me, just in terms of putting myself in a position where I'm always inspired to write. And the last thing I'll say on that point is when I wrote this book, that was a moment of inspiration that I've had before, that I haven't had in a while, and that completely fueled the writing of this book. There were definitely moments after I got that rough draft out where it was like editing it was just like, man, this is not working. That's not going to work. I got to figure this out. But this was and unlike any other story I've written that's published worthy, this was a an act of passion. Like it
Yeah.
that came out in
Just
pure,
easily.
almost pure inspiration for that weekend that I wrote that. I can't imagine another weekend where I would write 22,000 words.
Well, that's definitely, it's good to have on a good day, like 2,000 words is
Yeah,
a good day for
or
a writer.
500. Like like that's usually my pace when I'm not inspired. It's like you got to write, you got to make it your habit, and I definitely subscribe to that. Otherwise, you'd never get like you can't wait for a weekend like the weekend and I know I can't, or I'll not never write another thing. But my typical writing days are sometimes I'll have 2,000, and actually I feel like that's probably about average. But I've definitely had the 300 word one where it's just like, man, I'm just glad I got 300 words on the page,
Yeah. It's
and
a
then I probably
struggle.
end up deleting it the next day. So it's just like, but
Yeah.
so yeah.
No, I agree. And it's those moments of inspiration. And but it is a difficult as a writer, it's a really big challenge, this inspiration, this muse thing.
Hmm.
Because what it if there is that thing you're waiting for, which it can feel
Right.
like I am gonna wait for this. Like I'm gonna, maybe live an exciting life and then hopefully be struck by the muse, right? The
Hmm.
the danger though is that if you don't have control over it, at all, or have any way of stoking the fires for the muse, then
Hmm.
you're really at the mercy of this thing that will
Oh no,
strike you
I
or not.
absolutely agree. You don't,
And
yeah,
that I think is his point, one of his points that
yeah.
Poe is talking about. And he doesn't explicitly say that, but there is something like, and this is something I think about because it's like, do I really lead an exciting life, and should I be a writer? Because it's like,
Oh,
or should I like go become a mercenary or something and travel the world
I
on a
don't think you need
ship
to
and
live an exciting. I don't live an exciting life at all, and I think I'm perfectly
well, but
equipped
that's the
right.
expectation though, is like the people will tell you, if you don't know what to write about, go do exciting things and then write about it. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think you should do exciting things, and I think writing is an exciting thing to do. But I also think that there's, what I call it is like filling the well for
Uh-huh.
inspiration. And for me personally, it's experiences. It's also this is one of the things I learned from Rand in her Art of Fiction, which is my Bible. I've read that literally over 20 times. It is a great
Wow.
great story. Like I've
Read it.
written, what's that?
I read it once. I
Yeah, I
got you,
mean,
bro.
it's incredible. I read it early on, and I just kept reading it, and I would listen to it as well later. But I had the book, and I was listening to it all the time and reading it. It's just, she has a whole course on it, or that she gave, and it's actually incredible. And one of the things, the day to day techniques that I enjoy doing that has helped
Hmm.
is the idea of, well, one, when I read or watch something, I'm breaking it down in terms of the plot and why the plot is that way, and if it could be other ways. That's one thing she called, developing a plot sense. And I think
Mm,
that has been very helpful for me, is looking at things and like, well, what was the plot of, what was the story about, like in
hmm.
the events that made it happen. And
Hmm.
that is kind of like a reverse engineering type technique, and I've actually, reverse engineered stuff word by word so there's
Hmm.
a short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, his
Hmm.
weirdest one, called Wakefield.
Oh, I
And
haven't read that.
yeah, it's very un Hawthornian in a certain
You
way.
got it.
It's very weird. Um, and I love that short story. So what I did was something I learned as a teacher, actually. It's the Benjamin Franklin method, that we used to kind of teach at our school, Laporte. I don't know if you guys do it, but it's basically where you kind of like circle certain, like, couple words in a
Hmm.
sentence, and then you write those words, and then you recreate the sentence without looking at the original source in your own
Hmm.
words. And the
Okay.
idea that Benjamin Franklin was doing was trying to capture some of the, juju of the original writer.
Hmm.
Um, and so I did that
That's it.
with this whole short story. And then I actually molded it and kind of shaped it into my own story, but still modeled on that in order to get a taste of how Hawthorne structures this, like, on a really, really granular level. And I think
Hmm.
it's one of my favorite short stories that I've written because it's
Right.
so
Awesome.
modeled on his in a sense,
All right. Well,
but
I'd like to
updated.
read it. You should give me both of those. I haven't read, what's it called? Wakefield?
That's the Hawthorne one. The one I wrote
Yeah.
is called The Abysmal Dismal Mr. Boomerang.
All right. That's a great title. Let's send them. If you have it, I'd love to read it, and I'll
Yeah.
look up Wakefield. I'll say this last thing. First of all, again, I'm not saying you should write when you're inspired and that you shouldn't outline. As a
No, I know you're
writing
not,
teacher,
for
I
sure.
can't say that. You gotta outline.
Yeah.
You have to write. You have to do it often. I think if you were someone who only waited for inspiration, I mean, I don't even want to get into all of the everybody's varying abilities. I think when you're writing constantly, you're sharpening your tool for when you have that moment of inspiration.
Yep.
And you get a moment of inspiration doesn't equal good writing. It just means you got the story out. I'm not what I had at the
Yeah.
end of that weekend wasn't something someone should read. It was 22,000 words that I could then turn into something
Yep.
good through the next 2 weeks of just and more because once I did the line editing, that took me all the way to I think the first week in May or something. So you it, you want to build the habit so that you're prepared to have a moment of inspiration and thrive in that. And I would liken it the experience of being able to write when you're like highly inspired. I would liken it, for lack of a better um, metaphor to basketball because I played basketball and I got to play overseas a little bit. And one of the greatest experiences is when you're playing inspired basketball.
Mm.
Get my hands around my way. Inspired basketball, which is that moment when you're in the zone
Yep.
and you can't miss. And that's an amazing feeling. But that doesn't mean you only wait until you do that in
To
order to
take a
shoot the
shot.
basketball,
Yeah.
right? Like you still
Gotta
go
take
to
the shot.
practice. You still go to practice. You still put up 300 to 500 shots. You still play the games. You still have bad games. You still have, your average game. For me, I think I averaged about maybe 18 to 20 when I was in Japan. But then when you have that moment of inspiration, they're pushing you. It doesn't really matter. The ball's going in, and that's what that moment of inspiration and writing for me felt like. Um,
Yeah.
it was like I've been writing. I know how to put these words on the page, and they're all coming right now. It was like being in a zone where I couldn't miss
Yeah.
until I got all of those 22,000 words on the page. So,
I think
yeah.
that's wonderful advice. And for whatever reason, I think it's just because I do the show, I get writers who ask me advice. It's like, I don't know, man, just write. But, like write on advice on what, how to start a podcast. I can help you there, but becoming a successful writer, you better, ask Mr. King over there or something. Like, I have no
Yeah, don't
idea.
ask me either. I'm just saying my experience. I'm not successful yet.
well,
Hopefully coming, but
I think you're doing great work, but I actually meant Stephen King in that case. But
oh no, I see what you're saying.
yeah, but I think ask you too. This is you're I think you're on the path, and this is a great book and a good moment for this book. By the way, I'll put that out there just because of everything that's going on in the world. I think it's an important story to be told. But I was just saying, like, the advice that it's weird people ask me that for advice, but all I do say is write. Just
Yeah.
and people don't like that advice, which is weird, but they want something else. But I'm like, just write every single day. Just write, because exactly what you said. It's just like, how do I, get into the NBA? Or how do I make it to Carnegie Hall? Practice, right? It's like, just fucking write, dude. Like every single day. It doesn't matter if it's good. Doesn't matter if it's crap.
Yeah.
You should be
I
writing
gave that
every single
advice to
day.
someone who was having writer's block. They were like, it was a forum, and so, someone was just like, "What do I do when I have writer's block?" I write.
Yeah,
That's
just
what I
write.
do. And
Just write something
that's what
else
I
if you
do when I
have
have
to.
writer's block. Is I write.
Yeah, just
It
write
might be
something
crap,
else,
but you
whatever.
got to write something. And so yeah, you're gonna miss shots. You're gonna
Yeah,
have good games. You have bad games, but you still play. You still do it.
still play. I want to read a section of your book, if like one page almost, if that's okay, that I thought was really good.
Which page?
It's okay. I don't want to give it away, so if you don't want to, that's okay. But I think it's good style, and it's a good moment that I like.
Okay.
It's the first page of A Fistful of Darkness. I don't know. It doesn't say what chapter this is. It just says A Fistful of Darkness.
I don't know if you're allowed to talk about your favorite things in your own book, but I love all the titles to my chapters.
So here's my thing on that. I don't think it's wrong to be proud of it. I do think that some people think it's weird, but I don't think it's weird personally. I'm very proud of my stuff, even the stuff like Once More Around the Infinite, which,
Uh-huh.
by the way, I hired an editor for that, and he talk about crapping all over something. He like tore
That's
it
what they're
to
there for.
shreds, and
Yeah.
it really made me reevaluate the whole thing, and I did a lot of work on it.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was. I've never had that level of disdain for my work that he literally.
That's what an editor is supposed to do. I had an editor.
Well, but this editor quit. Like, he didn't like it so much he quit, and I was like,
Oh,
"Wow!" So that
I
was
don't know.
awesome in a painful way,
That was
and it was
awesome.
very eye opening. But it helped in reorganizing and realigning my sense of things. Um,
Editors, editors. I need more experience with more editors before I can really draw this conclusion. But I
yeah,
had I hired an editor for the novel that's going to be coming out soon, in his own image, which is the slave narrative, and it was hard not to feel like he hated everything about me as a person as I read his comments.
yeah.
Um, it was to the point where I had to email him like, "Did you like anything about the book?" And then he came back to me like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it
Yeah.
has this quality and that quality, but that's not
Well,
what I get paid to do. I get paid to tell you
how to
what's
improve it.
wrong with
No, and that's what you want.
it."
I do think it's a balance. Like, it's interesting as an editor.
Mhm.
That's something, that's one of the reasons I did Troubadour Magazine. I do want to edit. I think I'm pretty good at it.
Mhm.
Like I do actually want to work with other fiction writers.
Mhm.
It's something I enjoy, but I do think there's a range that you can do. Like, in terms of editing, you can basically destroy someone and not in a way that's not helpful, or you can destroy them in a way that's helpful. Right. And it's
Mhm.
like, what place is it coming from? Because the goal in my mind of an editor is whatever you're trying to do is help the person realize their vision and get
Mhm.
that to the best craft possible. But I think some editors that aren't the best, they try to get you to do their vision. And that's where you can draw a line. And it's hard to differentiate because you don't want, as the writer, you don't want to say, well, you don't want to have that attitude of, well, this person's a jerk, they don't know anything, because then you're that writer who's like can't accept criticism. It's
Mhm.
like you're being a wuss or something. It's like,
The
well,
the most valuable. I don't mean to cut you off.
no, it's all right, go ahead.
The most valuable
I
thing I
should be
learned
cut off
about
more often.
no, the most valuable thing I learned about um, having a book edited, and I don't know how universally true this is because again I'm still fairly new at all of this, but if you should query editors. It's
Yeah,
almost like querying an agent for a book. You don't work with an editor because he's an editor. There are
yeah,
editors that won't like your style, and that has nothing to do with how good or bad the book is.
yep,
And
yep,
a good editor will tell you this is not my style.
yep,
Um,
absolutely,
yeah,
100%.
and that was something I didn't realize until the novel that I was working on.
Same here, man. Same
Yeah,
here.
it's
That's what
important.
happened.
Well, no, I figured it out. I figured it out in a good way because I didn't figure it out through the editor. I figured it out um, when I was put in contact with an editor, and she basically told me this is how you should go about doing it. And she told me what the book wasn't right for her,
Yeah,
but then she gave me a long list of editors it would be good for, and then I found an editor out of that list,
yep,
and
yep.
and worked with that editor, and that was just eye opening because when you find the editor that's for you and that gets what you're trying to do and loves the style that you write in and all that, then you know that everything they're going to do to tear that book apart is done
To
with
make it
love.
better. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's meant done to make it better.
As a way, opposed to the other way around.
Yeah,
And then I worked with another editor who, basically, he's the cheapest. He was the cheapest option. I'd never worked with an editor that was less expensive than he was, but he was complete. He did not discriminate between projects. He would work on just about any project. At least he didn't indicate that he discriminated between projects. And so it was great on the one hand that he was cheap, but it was on the other hand, it was just like I found myself with his edits. I think I let him do half the book at one point. I found myself wondering if he even liked the book that I was trying to do. And
yeah.
yeah, so when you find the editor in the right way and you should query them, you won't that won't be the question, and then you can just take their criticism knowing that they're trying to make the book better, not trying to like tear you down. So
Yep.
that's something I
Yeah,
learned.
no, I think that's great advice, and that's kind of the conclusion I came to. But you
Mhm.
have to kind of learn that, and it's one of the nice things about being in this self-publishing world is that you do have control over that. In the past, you might have somebody who is kind of assigned to you, and
Mhm.
hopefully you can work with them,
Mhm.
and hopefully not, and hopefully they were hired, and they were, if it's like a big, publishing company, they were hired, and they are good as editors in
Mhm.
helping the particular writer they're trying to work
Mhm.
through.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes.
but so yeah, I think that's good advice. Now, are you okay with me reading this little?
Oh yeah, that first page of that chapter. Yeah,
Okay,
that doesn't tell anything too much.
yeah, I didn't think so, but I thought it was a really good moment that I enjoyed. Let me actually bring this up. Okay, so called A Fistful of Darkness, the chapter. I won't go into
Hmm.
what happened before. I don't think you need to know too much in this sense, just kind of,
Don't tell him don't
yeah, I
say
won't
anything.
say anything about what's going on. But my
He's
father
nice.
used to tell me that there was no heaven or hell, just earth and men. Earth can be heaven or hell. It all depends on what men are willing to make of it. So hold on to the light, to that light, I said to Eulame as we sat at the piano in the church. That's what my father told me. Hold tight to it, because it's so much easier to get a hold of darkness if you're not careful. He used to make me practice holding on to light. I stopped to smile at the memory. Go ahead, he used to say. Try it. Reach out into that daylight and try to grab hold of it. Close your hands tight around it. Now peek into those fists. What do you see? Of course, he knew what I was going to see every time. So I really liked that passage. I thought it
Right.
spoke a lot. I mean, it goes on. I don't want to go on because it gets
Right.
into the
Right. Right.
plot a little bit after this, but
Hmm.
um, it really goes into what's going on. I think it is a clever way of commenting on the overall theme and tone
Hmm.
and what's going on in this
Hmm.
young man's life
Hmm.
without it being philosophizing for the sake of philosophizing, right? And it's kind of integrated into this story of this moment that he had with his father, which is one that I can, not something that exactly like that, but I can kind of
Hmm.
feel it and remember those kind of odd moments of wisdom that your father
Hmm.
maybe gave you when you were like 7, right? You were just a
Right.
little boy or 6 years old. And that's just a silly little thing he told you
Hmm.
that for whatever reason stuck with you, right? Like a spot of time.
Right.
Um,
That's one of the trickiest things about dialogue that I just hope that I continue to get better at. Um, is just being able to do something like that without philosophizing, but also like it does that. It kind of almost encapsulates the theme of the entire book, but you don't feel like you're being preached to, and it feels like something that like an actual organic conversation that someone once had. Yeah, yeah, that's I wanted just personally. I don't know how this fits into where you're going with that, but I just want to keep getting better at doing that kind
Well,
of thing.
I was just going into it that I thought the passage was very much in the vein of romanticism that I've been
Hmm.
studying for Troubadour Mag, and just the comparisons, the way
Hmm.
that psychologically this event ha- means something. It's not
Hmm.
just a throwaway event. It
Hmm.
means something to him. He stuck with it, and then it's written beautifully. Like I think it flows well,
Well,
um,
thank you.
and it you start off with these specific concrete about what he's talking about, and then
Hmm.
but the idea of trying to grab light and that whole concept, and then of course the clever way that the father was teaching him something by saying, now
Hmm.
look into it and what do you see, even though you're trying to grab light, which is
Hmm.
something to, I think, read the whole story to kind of get a better sense of
Right.
what that is going on in
Right.
that idea. But
Yeah.
I just thought it was, really well spoken. I mean, there's really well written. There's a lot of little passages I highlighted um, over time. Let's see, another one that's, I don't know the page because I don't have the book yet. I just have location 543. Um, so as early as I could remember, I learned the notes with him. I used to make wish. Yeah, the notes. He's talking about piano. I love this.
Hmm.
I used to make wishes on those notes, and he's talking about playing the piano. And there's a lot of little quotable things like that, like making wishes on the notes, and
Yeah.
kind of his feelings toward things, and it's captioned in a pithy statement that
You-
really helps you to get a fuller view of this kind of an odd kid, really, when you think about where
Yeah.
he is. He's a
Yeah.
very odd kid
Yeah.
to have this. There's some it skirts with the edges almost of believability sometimes, because he's so good and he wants to be good, but then he's struggling with it, and he does struggle with it. He tries, and then he does have these eruptions, which I won't talk about, but there's
Right.
so it's which makes you want to realize it more. And this is where I was like talking about the fullness of him, and I can definitely sympathize with him,
Uh-huh.
even though I come from quite a different world.
Hmm.
um, but it's still, I can sympathize with which I think goes to the universality of someone. Like I think a lot of kids could sympathize with this type of character.
Yeah. Well, that's also the goal as well, right? I hope that even though it's about a young black man in the hood going through whatever he's going through, that and I hope that with everything, with the slave narrative as well, it's about a runaway slave. But I hope that what what goes on in the soul of a black boy in the hood, or what goes on in the soul of a slave trying to be free, is that's those are, I hope that those are universal themes, or that I can present them universally anyway, so that anyone can read it and recognize some part of themselves in it. If for no other reason than that, particularly now, we're having such a hard time as a society
Yeah.
seeing what the that seeing the pain that the other person is going through. Can I let you in on a little secret about that passage you just read, though?
Oh yeah.
And now, and now I almost wish I'd left it in. I took a line out of that
Uh-oh.
little passage. Wishing was it? Wishing upon the notes. So you know, well, maybe I should tell you after. I don't know. Should I reveal this? So the very next line after that were the lyrics of "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star," but because it's a simple song that you can teach a child on the piano,
Yeah.
it's it's making a wish upon a star, and I was
Yeah.
trying to make a metaphor between the star and the notes. And I don't remember right now off the top of my head why I took it out of there, but it was partly like I was trying to play on that whole, I guess, kind of wordplay of
Yeah.
wishing on a star, wishing on the notes, or the notes of a song about wishing on a star. Like that was where I
Well,
was kind of
this is one thing I've noticed with romanticists, even in spirit, is
going.
the desire to play with words, which I think a
Hmm.
lot of modern novels and stories aren't like that as much. They're much more. There's a either they're trying to go off into weird, phrases for the sake of weird phrases, or journalistic writing is what they're trying to go
Hmm.
for. It's as
Hmm.
literal as possible.
Hmm.
Whereas I think there's a playfulness that some writers have that I really enjoy, and a playfulness with words where they're trying to get meaning, they're trying to convey it and leave it within the setting, the characters, all the important elements of a story. But
Hmm.
there's this desire to kind of, the phrase that I always use is from Oscar Wilde, that any
Hmm.
man who calls a spade is fit to use one, fit only to use one.
Right.
Spade to like dig in the dirt with. And
Right. Right. Right.
and you shouldn't call a spade a spade. If you're gonna write, you should try to find some other romantic way to talk about that, to describe
Right.
it.
No, I
And
get
I
it.
think that you can't do that with literally every word, but the
Mhm.
desire to do that needs to be in your story if for me to really
Oh
like
yeah,
it.
and the
And I
skill,
think
that's another
it's in
one of
your
those
story.
things you have to teach. Like that's another one of those things that not have to teach, and I think there's some people who have a kind of a natural inclination towards that, which probably just comes from reading a lot of good writing like that.
Yeah.
But it's another one of those elements of writing that you could have entire lessons about. And I think to
Oh,
the
sure.
extent that people do it well or don't do it well, it's a skill that needs, it's a skill that needs to be acquired.
That's why you got to read
Uh,
poetry, baby. It gives they do that a lot, I think,
so
in
I read
great.
poetry,
I
so
know
I
you do.
write it.
You
Yeah,
write poetry.
so, yeah.
Yeah, you write poetry.
Um,
You have that playfulness with words. Anyway, I think it's something we lose as kids, and it's
mhm,
because of schooling, a lot like public schooling. Like I think it kind of beats that out of you. But you work with kids, and at least for me, it did. But and I've seen this how much kids love the sounds and words. They love words. Like teach them a word, and they will,
mhm,
that has a sound, and they'll just keep repeating it over and over again and playing with it. And like, think about
yeah,
supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Like they're not afraid of big words. They love the sound of them, and they'll
yeah,
chant with it, and they'll go scream it in different dialects or whatever. Like the kids love words, and so something happens along the way where we lose that love of the
absolutely.
sound of words and things like that.
That's interesting. I never did, so I don't
You
know.
didn't know, yeah, it makes sense. I did.
But I'm not saying like I don't know where the source of that would come from. That's an interesting point. Interestingly enough, I feel like I don't know if it's a school type of thing or what. Edgar Allan Poe definitely played a role, but
There you
so did
go.
Nas. I think we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
Once I got into hip hop, I was going to be a writer from there.
Okay,
I
nice.
think I thought
Yeah.
I wanted to be a writer from like really the time I learned how to write, probably like second or third grade. But I was pretty sure I was going to like listening to Edgar Allan Poe and then listening to Nas is like, yo, they just do amazing things with words.
I think
I
that's
need
going to
to,
be, hold on, but I think that's going to be our tagline. Listening to Edgar Allan Poe and then listening to Nas. It's not a
yeah,
statement that I think that sums you up perfectly.
it
Edgar
should be.
Allan
No,
Poe's
everybody
Poe
should listen to Nas
meets
and Edgar
Nas.
Allan Poe, maybe
Well, I think
Tupac.
that's great. You would just those types of combos that the unique combinations that make a human soul.
Yeah. Hey, can I? I need to grab my charger very quickly. May I grab that?
Yeah, I just think that's an interesting, an interesting combination. Now, um,
They have the soul of Nas and Edgar Allan Poe. That's one. That's in one of my poems, kind of.
really, okay, that
The
makes
first
sense.
poem, what is it? Purpose. I can't remember what I titled it in the end. The first actual poem in the Beauty and Perspective book.
Okay,
Anyways,
yeah, which was the topic of our last conversation.
right.
So you need to write more books so you could be on the podcast more often. Is what I'm
Or
getting
I
from.
can just jump on and we can talk about things like quarantine and all
Oh
that.
yeah, you can always do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
so you had a creative outburst in quarantine. I've had a
yeah.
bit of a creative outburst as well, but
Oh, yeah.
mine has been really negative. So I've produced, but personally I've felt very negative in a lot of ways personally. So it'd be interesting because you're telling me before we got started that you've had like it's actually been decent for you this quarantine.
Yeah. Aside from kind of being upset that um, the world has kind of stopped, and kind of being anxious about how things are going to go on. I was supposed to go see my mom. My mother's not feeling well, and I wanted to go see her. And then my family. So 2019 was a rough ending for me. And
Mm.
for no other reason than that, I thought 2020's got to be amazing because I lost my family home.
Ooh.
It burned down. I don't know if you knew about that, but
Oh, I
like
saw that.
December
Yeah, I'm sorry,
27th,
man.
2019, the house
Yeah,
burned down.
I
All the
remember.
photos, everything, all of that stuff's gone. And then
Jesus.
around the same time that I found out that my mom is in very, very poor health. And so I wanted to make it home, and I had made two different plans to get home, and nothing. I wasn't able to do it, and then I had to cancel the trip. Once it became apparent that we needed to cancel trips because we didn't want to spread coronavirus to people who might be vulnerable. Again, that was the first thought I had was I can't even go home now because if I could be carrying it and
Yeah.
I might not have symptoms, but if I give this to my mother, I'll never forgive myself. So the 2019 ended rough, and then going into quarantine was just kind of a rough, anxious time, I think, for everybody. Um, but aside from that, um, I, I, I will stop short of thanking the quarantine. I could have done this. I could have done what I've done without being forcibly restrained to my home. However, my quarantine was pretty great. It's pretty great, and I felt like it was going to be pretty good
Okay. Well, I appreciate
pretty
your
early
honesty.
on. And I had to stop myself because I wasn't sure how people were feeling. One of the first posts I made about quarantine was that I had just bought all the things for an old fashioned, and I'm about to learn how to make one. And
Ooh.
my big, I don't know what's going on with your quarantine, but my quarantine is about to be amazing. Like I put that on Facebook, and then I realized some people are probably more anxious, or I felt like that as anxious as much as I was, feeling, wary as well. I felt like I wasn't communicating that, and I didn't want to communicate that. I don't like going on social media and burdening the world with my sorrows. That's what you have friends for. This
That's
kind of sounds
right.
like a joke, but that's what
Burn,
I talk to my friends about that kind of stuff.
burn them with your
Uh,
shit.
say that again.
Burn them with your crap. No,
Yeah, but also I mean that
I
friends
know.
they get it, they get you, and
It's a good place to
yeah,
vent and you get over it, move on, and
yeah.
they
Like I
encourage
don't
you.
I don't want to appeal to um, I don't know. I won't. I'll stop short of saying what my opinions are on it because they're not fully formed, and I
On
don't want to make
quarantine?
it seem like no about what kind of stuff I share on social media
Oh,
because
okay.
I don't want to say something that slights someone else who thinks differently than like
Oh,
what I do on social media and what other people do. That's just different. I
yeah.
generally don't like to post my like negative thoughts on
I think
social
most
media.
people are like that. But yeah, some people
Yeah,
post their negative stuff on purpose.
some people just air it out, and I mean, there's an aspect of it that's important because there's a community on Facebook, and sometimes you need that community. And then there's an aspect of it where it's just like, dude, are you just gonna it's gonna be upset for all of
That's just gonna be
like
you now.
every post? Are you happy about anything? What do you, I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah,
I took that post about my starting to make an old fashioned down because I felt like it might have been insensitive to people who were feeling more uh,
despondent.
anxious, yeah, despondent about it. I didn't want to make it seem like I
Yeah.
didn't care that they felt despondent. I just knew that I was going to have a good quarantine. So I feel like I'm a licensed bartender now. Like I have a
Nice.
full bar in there, and
Yeah.
I am dope. I can't. I won't even say if I do say so myself because
Would you ever go to that Halloween party with my house in the Green
yeah.
Hills,
Well, I don't
where I
remember if it
was
was a party, but I do remember going to a party where you did drinks.
yeah, where I was
Was that
mixing
a party?
drinks? Yeah, and I had that hat in
Yeah.
the like in the suspenders, and I was like an old time bartender. Was the I was going for it. That was the Halloween thing, and I made a whole
I don't
bunch
think
of
I went to a Halloween thing like that, but that's not but I've had mixed drinks from you.
okay, like
So you must
absinthe.
have had
Did
something
I
else.
make absinthe for you with the sugar cube on the?
Yeah. You did a
Okay,
couple things for me. You were mixing drinks. I don't think that was Halloween though, but I can't
okay, I've done it. I mean, I've done it more than
remember.
once. I didn't. That was just one
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Um,
I went to another party where you did that. There's at the Palace, right?
yeah, that's
That's
what he
where
liked to call it, but I didn't like to call it that because it was my
I
place too. I mean, he
I
found
feel
it
you.
first, fine,
Yeah, I feel you.
but no, I
I get
love him. It's fine. But no, well, I also did a Rome party and we had wine, and I think you were
No, I
there.
went to the Rome party too, but
Yeah.
I don't remember what kind of party it was. I don't think I was dressed up though. Like I
Okay,
think
fair
I
enough.
may remember if I was dressed up. I just know that to be honest, that was the first time I'd ever seen anyone mixing drinks purposefully in their house. So and
Well,
inadvertently you inspired me to do what I like,
I love it.
yeah, kind
So
of indirectly.
I'll tell you how I got inspired. There's the Roosevelt Hotel in
Uh-huh.
LA,
Uh-huh.
and at the bottom there's a very nice bar, and they
Oh
use
yeah, I've been there.
very fresh ingredients. And me and some friends were there, and we had some drinks, and I just remember like this is taking it to another level. It's like a fine cook where it's not
Oh yeah.
just throwing crap together. Like they really took it seriously. And I was like, and I talked to the bartender. I was like, man, can you tell me a little bit? It was slow. I was like, tell me a little bit about like your philosophy behind this. Like what makes you do this kind of things? And he said, buy a book called The Art of the Bar. And that was the book that I bought. Actually, my
hmm
friend bought, and he gave it to me basically. Um, and that really inspired me because when you read that book, it's mostly how to mix drinks, what kind of ingredients to do, the procedures, but there's
hmm
a philosophy behind it that I really loved about the mingling of people, getting them together, like, and they tell the story of these young ladies that come to their bar, the
hmm
writers of the book come to their bar, and they're kind of having a reunion, a friend reunion of years ago, and they're all kind of like dull, like, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm okay. And then he brings over these drinks. They have a couple drinks and they're like lighting up and they're
hmm
happy and they're, hugging and laughing and falling off the chair, laughing, not drunk, but just, healthily. But anyway,
Right.
like this little,
Healthily falling off the chair.
this little thing of this having a drink really,
Mm.
put them into that next stratosphere. So I really like that book. I recommend it to people.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll have to take a look at it. I actually the direct cause of my well, no, I won't say the direct cause. The direct cause of me putting a full bar in my house was this video that I got from a friend.
mm,
Um, you know Kyle.
yeah.
Yeah.
We
He
saw a
sent me a
Greek play
video.
together once.
What was that?
We saw a Greek play together once at the
Interesting.
Getty, the Getty,
Interesting.
randomly.
He sent me this video. There's a guy on YouTube who's like my new best friend on my end, in my mind. Like I love this guy. I just want to meet him and hang out with him.
Yeah.
Uh, he I think his YouTube channel is like the art. Oh, what's it called? It's like the art of. I can't remember what it's called. I'll send it to you later. But he has a great. He just posted 5 3 ingredient drinks for the quarantine. And I watched that, and that
Mm,
was like how I started, and I was just like,
yeah.
more, more. I want to learn how to make more things. My
Yeah.
martini's on point, my mojito's on point. Old fashioned, obviously, that
Mojitos.
was the first one. I do margaritas are good. I make a good sidecar.
Mm,
I make a good daiquiri. Manhattans are pretty easy, but I make like I have a good catalog of things I can do to the point where I don't feel like I want to go to a bar for one because I have all this expensive alcohol in my house. Why spend money someplace else when I already have it all here? And then for two, because I'm gonna just be a snob now. Like I'm just gonna be like, oh, you make margarita. Oh, no, you make martinis with vodka. That's different. But
yeah.
people do it all the time. But I'm gonna just be like, how do you? Honestly, now that I know how to make a martini, I don't know how people mess it up. I've had some really bad martinis, and I just don't get it. It's a really
Yeah.
easy drink to make. So it's like I'm gonna be that guy now. Like I can only really go to the bar and get a beer, and that's probably better because I'm gonna save money
Definitely save
because
money.
beers are
Yeah.
cheaper, and I don't have to
Depending on
worry
what
about
beers you get,
messing up
though.
my drink.
Some of those beers
Say
are
that
pretty
again.
expensive. Depends on what beers you get. Some of those beers are expensive these days. Getting like nine
Yeah, I
dollar
mean they're always
beers,
gonna be more expensive, but it's nothing like ordering
a $20.
I don't know, a $15 to $20 old fashioned
Yeah.
and having that old fashioned suck. Like it's
Well,
the
there's by the way, if so you're so we're talking about quarantine though, and these
hmm
making these drinks. Now you're
hmm
making these drinks for yourself though, just as like a fun activity and to enjoy these
yeah,
tasty
for the
drinks.
most part, yes.
Yeah, it's not quite
I
for,
can't
although
tell you that I've made it for other people because
it's
that's
not
against
legal
the
yet, right?
rules.
But you will, like you'll have, gatherings together. And now you'll have this cool thing that you could do, and you can mix drinks for people.
Oh yeah, I'm
Be a
looking forward to it. I can't
mixologist.
wait to have a cocktail party because now I know what a cocktail party is. I did in my mind. I didn't know. I was just like, oh, cocktail. Like I never knew what the word cocktail stood like. Cocktail shrimp. What are they? And now
Yeah.
and then I was thinking about like, man, I know how to make all these drinks. Man, I can't wait to have my friends come over. They'll come over and I can make cocktails. Oh, cocktail party. That's what
There
that
you
means.
go. And then it all
That's what
clicked.
I'll have a cocktail party. Yes,
See?
I'll be the first.
And then when you write about that, you'll have that revelation, and you can write a character who has that revelation as well. Or revelations like that, because you know what that's like.
Yeah, I suppose. I hope that my characters are more interesting than I was when I realized what cocktail meant in cocktail party. But so yeah, so the quarantine I learned how to make cocktails. I cut my own hair. I learned how to cut my own hair.
Oh, okay.
This fade is like it's kind of
Nice.
short, right?
Well done.
I've been doing that.
Yeah, yeah, we can see it. No, it's well done. I luckily
Yeah,
I just
and
kept
then
my hair cut the same, so I was easy.
I've been painting. I sold a few paintings. I didn't
Oh,
expect to sell
congratulations.
any. Yeah, thank you. I didn't expect to sell any, and then a close friend reached out and bought one, and then a bunch of people on Instagram started hitting me up about wanting one. So
That's
I've
awesome.
sold three at this point, which I
Nice.
think bodes very well for my career because
Yeah.
I hope to be much, much better at some point. And
Yeah.
if you're buying the stuff that I'm putting out now, wait till you see the stuff I'm putting out like 2 years from now. If
Exactly.
I keep at it.
So
Yeah.
quarantine was very positive for you in a
It
sense.
it was very positive, I think, in most senses.
Most senses, okay.
And yeah, in a larger sense, um, because I think I discovered how I'm going to go about being successful at certain pursuits.
Mm,
Um, and I think the only well one thing I don't know if it's a good or bad thing yet is that I'm actually more likely to stay in my house now. Like I was talking earlier about being more introverted than most people think, and now I have
mm,
fewer reasons to leave my house. Like
okay.
why would I leave my house to get a drink when I can make my own drinks? Like why would I pay what I pay for a haircut? I've always cut my hair, but I feel like even like during the quarantine, I reached a different level of being able to cut my right. Like
Yeah.
I had a
You
very
gotta
purposeful like I'm
so
gonna be
your
double
house is
thing.
becoming your house is kind of becoming your mansion, your castle.
No,
Now.
it's absolutely and like I've got patio furniture now. Like I spend entire days out here now. I don't even
Yeah.
know what's inside there yet. So
Yeah, yeah.
eh, Yeah, I did. I knew
That's good.
I've always been a person of like personal space and kind of making wherever I live like my castle, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, but the quarantine really cemented that. I loved being here before, and it's one of the reasons I moved in here was for all of the different natural splendor. And there's a creek, they're draining the creek now to clean it out, but there's a creek that runs here, and it's just really, really peaceful and beautiful to be here. And I actually love this place more with the quarantine. Like I'm
Okay.
glad they're opening, starting to open things up. But I think I'm more glad that I'll be able to just have friends here
Yeah.
and show them what I've done with the place
Yeah.
during the quarantine
Share,
and what I
share
like
your
the skills I've
cave that
acquired.
you've been working on since you've
Yeah.
been trapped in it. But you
Yeah.
having a okay. Well, I
I don't know how trapped I was either. I would drive like here. This is a hack to quarantine that I don't know. Maybe I should have shared it with more people. I never went grocery shopping near me. I
okay.
would drive 45 minutes away to go grocery shopping
Oh,
just
nice. Yeah,
because
yeah. It's
why
good.
not? Gas is cheap.
Yeah.
It's beautiful outside,
Yeah.
and they're not going to stop me going to a grocery store in Corona just because I don't live. They don't know.
Yeah.
For all they know. And also I found toilet paper. Like I found the more remote places I would go to, I could
They had
find
toilet paper.
things
Yep.
that weren't at the stores near me. So yeah, I took advantage. I took full advantage of the cheap gas. I
Yeah.
drove
Well,
everywhere.
I've gone on a couple bike rides just to
Uh,
go.
hmm.
But it's very for me it was very depressing because I always like to have a place to go. Like
Sure,
when I would get on a bike, I'd go somewhere, even if it
sure.
was far away. So it's,
Hmm.
you know, it was nice to be on the freeway and have no one around. So
Hmm.
like, on a bike, that's always the danger is other people.
Especially when everyone's a moron, right?
Everyone's a moron.
That's how I
Well, I mean,
thought.
yeah, exactly. But on a bike, I've actually done a show on this on death and riding a bike, a podcast on this.
Hmm.
Well, because it's something like you have to confront. If you're going to ride a motorcycle, you got to confront death, and I think it's one of the reasons why everybody should do it, at least limited period of time, because it sharpens like facing and thinking about death sharpens your understanding and appreciation of life. It makes you understand what's really going on. Not to say that you should play Russian roulette. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying this is why the Greeks valued tragedy over comedy. I think it's one of the reasons why death is such a and tragedy and negatives are such a prominent feature of all great works of art, or
Hmm.
many great works of art, more than any other topic are these negative tragedies. That's the greatness that we think of because it's an important topic to express. But anyway, the point is that like I would go on these excursions and that was okay, but I didn't like that we didn't have anywhere to go. I mean, for
Hmm.
me, quarantine has been hell in a sense. It's been really bad for me. I even though I produce stuff, it didn't. I wish I had your attitude. I appreciate your attitude. It's it's great, but for me, it was just not good. If I was living maybe in Laguna Hills, it would be a
Hmm.
little bit better. If I had my place even in Texas, where I had my
Hmm.
own place. Right now, it's the first time in a long time that well, when I was in the place in Laguna Hills, we had roommates, but it was a nice big house and we had lots of space. Right now, where I am in Northern California, I don't have that. I'm in a
Yeah.
little space, and that's a big problem.
Sure. No,
Um,
I can imagine. I can imagine.
yeah,
And again, I can imagine just the sentiment of being upset and being confined. To the extent that I was upset, it was definitely that. And then also, another thing that kind of shook me, or just kind of just I'll say annoyed me, was whenever celebrities would come on and be like, "Stay home." I'm like, "Yeah, have you seen your
yeah, I
home? Have
know
you
that is
seen where
stupid.
other people have to stay?"
Well, I
Like,
mean, you saw that Gal Gadot,
no, I didn't see it. I didn't watch a lot of things. Like I didn't watch the news. I still haven't started really watching the news. Like
yeah,
if you don't tell me it's happening, I don't know because I that one of the things that I basically uh, promised myself without saying anything verbally or even really thinking about it. It's kind of inadvertent. Was just to not watch things that would bother me. I didn't want to have conversations about coronavirus. That was one of the things I think that like got me to not snap on any of my friends, but like that was one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm gone. Is that we were
mm.
supposed to be having a like a, a what do you
Connection, a
call it?
personal connection,
No, no,
Or
we're supposed to be having one of those Zoom happy hours,
oh, Zoom
and
happy
the
hours.
conversation for the most part was coronavirus, and I was just like,
Yeah.
all right, cool, I'll see y'all later. I just don't want, I don't want to talk about that. Y'all can talk about it. Everybody here, you guys can all, but I'm
You
forming
don't
a
want to
bubble.
complain about it. You just wanted to kind of live your
I don't
life.
want to hear. This is my. I basically turned. This is my bubble,
Yeah.
and the only thing allowed in it is artistic endeavors and alcohol, and
Well,
that's
maybe you
all I
should start
really
like
wanted.
a commune or something and have
Well,
artist
now we're
school.
good, but that's all I wanted in my bubble during the
Yeah.
quarantine. I don't want to
No,
hear.
I think that's great, and I understand that completely. Um, yeah, I mean, the short stories I wrote were called Quarantine. The first one I wrote was called A Quarantine Nightmare. The Ebony Clock, A Quarantine Nightmare, and
Mm-hmm,
it's so basically the series of short stories that I wrote are a dystopian set of stories about this type of quarantine occurring, recurring over and over again,
mm-hmm,
and like what that might look like in the future
mm-hmm,
in this world. So it's very negative, and I still feel like for me it was a watershed moment in that I, am I don't know, third generation American. I have, roots in the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the South. A big family in all three locations,
mm-hmm,
and so I really feel like I'm of the United States in a lot of ways, and I love this
mm-hmm,
country. And it's
mm-hmm.
like that was the moment when they did that on a mass scale. When I was like, this isn't America. It's not. It's just dead. Like what I loved is dead. It is like, and
I, I,
there's just no
well,
other
I
way
agree
of
it's that, but I
phrasing it.
feel you. I understand what you're saying.
And so it was really crushing to me because I've always been so optimistic. I was like Ron Swanson, kind of, from
Yeah.
Parks and Recreation. It's like, why would anybody travel? You got this. Go here, just travel in the States. This is amazing. And it's like,
There is a great amount. You know what you needed to see why you should have been down here for the coronavirus, and it probably would have made you feel better, in particular about America or whatever.
yeah.
You should have just gone. You should have been here, and you should have seen how people went to Laguna Beach, anyways.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And I did do a couple little things like that, but they
Well,
still,
no, I'm just talking about the fact. Like, if you're, I guess my question to you would be, why do you think this is not America anymore? Just because some politicians passed a certain law, or whatever. I think that
but
if
they
you're
didn't just
concerned with,
pass any laws, man. So I was training for strongman. Like I was doing a actual training for an amateur strongman, which
hmm
meant 2 hours in the gym minimum every day. And I
hmm
was training hard, and that's
hmm
gone. Like I haven't touched iron in 3.5 months now since March 11th. I was there I was literally in the gym because I thought it was only going to be 2 weeks. So I was like, I'm going to get so I was there. Once I heard about it, I ran to the gym and I spent every moment. And even when they were closing down the gym for the last day, I was the last one there doing squats and
hmm
press. Like I was like pushing because I was like, I want to get as much as possible. I know I'm not going to get this for a couple weeks, but
hmm
I haven't missed like a gym day in almost a decade. Like I transformed my whole self 10
hmm
years ago from like this, lazy fat guy that I am right now to, like at least a more buff dude. But now, no, now I've lost all of that. Like all that work is gone and it was taken from now people could say, well, you could do push-ups. Yeah. And I've done a little bit of that, but it's like, that's not what I love. What I love is strength, building strength in the gym, the sounds of the gym. That's what I fell in love with. And for me, they took that away. And the same thing, like I love going to coffee shops and they took it away. Those are all closed, right? I worked from
Man,
home.
you maybe you wrote this book.
Which book?
The book and then he shot his cousin.
Why is, oh, because he's so, yeah. Well,
Well, no, because you remember you got to hold on to gotta,
oh, okay. Yeah.
you
Yeah. I
got to
mean,
hold on to it, man.
to that light. Yeah. I mean, that's what it feels like for sure. Yeah, you're right. And it just like, so it really like this really destroyed a kind of fantasy bubble of what America is, that they can do something like, to me, that they could shut down all the gyms, even that if they just did that alone,
hmm
and for such a little thing, really, in my view. Now, I won't get into the details. Coronavirus is
Yeah.
horrible, by the way. I
hmm
underestimated. I admit that on live, on my show earlier, so I don't need to get into
hmm
that. Hopefully, but I've definitely
hmm
I underestimated. But to like shut down all the gyms and like, I was at the Napa Valley. My friends Linda Cordair and Quint, I
hmm
went to their protest when they were trying to open back up, and like they were getting cease and desist, and they were being told not to do this, and the government went around their back to the landlords in order to stop them from opening up because they were doing it illegally. Now they are open thanks to a lawsuit by Pacific Legal Foundation, but
Hmm.
that's not. I mean, like I always heard conceptually about these things, like I'm blanking on the term, when they can confiscate your land and give you just compensation.
Hmm.
I
I
can't,
can't remember either. I know
yeah,
what you're talking.
so stupid. I'm feeling stupid right now, but I know what that is, and
It's one of those things where as soon as you
yeah,
say it,
I know, but anyway,
now I can't remember.
yeah,
Because
exactly. But anyway, everybody knows what we're talking about. They can buy your land or they take it from you for the purposes of the greater good. You always hear about those things, and it's like, well, that's not American. That's horrible. They shouldn't be able to do that. But it's not real. And like for the people that they did that to, where they actually took your home, whether you liked it or not,
hmm
that's eminent domain. Is not that's what it's called, eminent domain. That's not America. But it wasn't real to me. That like because it didn't affect me, right? But
hmm
this is real to me. This affected me. This just destroyed lots of years of work,
hmm
and not something I was making a living at, but something I loved to do. And
Sure.
so it was just, it really screwed me up. Although I produced more podcasts than I have. We have a new show. I got to do more shows because you guys were all trapped. So I always had, challenges getting guests on the show, but you guys didn't have anywhere to go. So I was
You
like, come
can't
on,
go anywhere. You
you can't
gotta
go anywhere.
come with
What's your
me, man.
excuse now? Everyone's giving me
Honestly, that's where
excuses
I was
before.
trying to go with the book, but the printers didn't let me do that. I was trying to get this book to people while they were not doing anything, and then they could read it, and I could get feedback.
Yeah.
But then everything was just upended by it. So I use you've heard of Ingram Spark as an
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've looked
yeah.
them up for sure.
Have you seen their business? Have you seen their printing delays?
No.
24 business days.
Oof.
24 business days. This book was ready to go May 7th.
Yeah. I mean, that's why
And
it's
I
like, I
couldn't do
understand what
anything
you're
but
trying to do with, the bookstore thing, but can't beat Amazon at this
they,
point.
they, they can't. In fact, I'm still waiting on Ingram. I decided at the last minute to just go with Amazon. The only problem with Amazon is that I had to release the book early, technically, in order to get hold of copies, because you can't get legitimate copies from Amazon until it's actually published. You can't until then. You can only get review copies, the ones that say
Oh,
not
the
for
galley
sale. Yeah, so I
galleys.
couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So uh, I basically had to release the book a little bit earlier than I wanted to, just so I could get my hands on physical copies. And Amazon is the one that did it. And Amazon sent me those books the next day. Like they sent me the
Freaking
books.
Amazon's
They
so
printed
amazing.
they printed something like 100 books and sent them to me the next day. And then I put in the next order, and I've got another shipment coming. They did that like that, and I'm still waiting on Ingram Spark.
Yeah.
And I had to pay Ingram Spark, so I'm really mad.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
man.
yeah, I'm really, because I had to pay them to set it up, and then you had to pay them for a couple of other things, and Amazon would have done it for free.
Yeah.
I mean, they do it for free, all the way for free. Except I would have bought the ISBNs anyways, but they basically do it for free. So yeah, yeah. I was trying to catch people in their houses too. It just didn't work out the way I
Well, you still
wanted
can
to.
because we're still here. I can't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go, really.
Well,
Still, I
yeah,
mean,
I don't. Things are starting to open up. I hear there's stadium over here. I think they're opening up.
oh, I miss Stadium. Yeah.
Yeah, we all do. Now
No,
we took it for granted before. It was like, oh, we
yeah,
saw it.
I remember that
Next month.
bar. Yeah, I mean, I would
I,
love to go to a bar. I would go to bars. Yeah, but those are still closed. In the Bay Area, the last I read, we're still looking at gyms and certain social places. August is the date that
yeah,
they
I think they're
gave
going to start doing that in. I heard later this month
for for
for the gyms. I think
for Laguna Hills.
for Orange County. I think.
Orange County, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
we're in Northern California, and they're freaking out.
yeah, yeah,
We were one of the first to go into lockdown.
yeah,
Not the first, but one of the first. But
yeah.
anyway, I have been trying to do creative stuff. Personally, I've been a little bit blank, but I've found it. I found a good group of writers, and we're calling ourselves the Pandemics, and we kind of work on each other's work, or comment on each other's work. And I'm probably going to put out like a book,
Endemics.
Pandemics, yeah,
I
Pendemics,
almost missed that.
yeah.
The
Well, we're going to
pronunciation.
put capital P, capital E, capital N, and then.
Cool.
But so we're probably going to do a quarantine tale book where we each write a couple or at least one. Like I'll have 3 or 4, and it's going to be about on the topic of isolation and quarantine life and things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean that's definitely
so
something.
collaboration.
In general, I hope we all just kind of take a look at all of the effects um, that having the quarantine in effect was, and not just like the economic ones, like the fact that people were isolated, the fact that it affected depressed people,
Yeah,
sick people. So I read a report somewhere that stated that fewer people were going in for preventative care, or people with heart conditions were not going. They were staying away from the hospitals because they were afraid of
coronavirus.
catching coronavirus, or just in general because they were told to stay home, and then
Well, and
that's
some things that are labeled elective surgeries are actually like, it's not like just breast augmentation. Like
mhm,
some elective surgeries are actually really important,
yeah,
in terms of health. But those were all outlawed or banned, if it was elective. And so it had to be an emergency in order to get one. And so there
yeah.
were a lot of
So
electives. Think about all the MRI, that were not used for during this time. So people are going to be having to wait 3 months to get diagnosed. That means there's going to be
yeah,
a spike in deaths and that,
all right, yeah.
from
That was one. I think
from
a
terminal
bunch of
illnesses.
doctors from California, I feel, put that report together or that letter together
Yeah, I
and
think
sent it
so.
to the president. Um, so I mean, I guess the thing that keeps me hopeful in terms of um, just not becoming or not despairing too much during this is that I think um, I don't know. It's hard for me to say that I think there is no America per se, and I'm not. I understand how you feel that way. I'm just from my and like I said, I can understand being despondent. There were definitely things that frustrated me, and I think I was in a similar place in various for various reasons in similar ways. Definitely had darker days than not. Anybody who's ever had me snap at them probably knows, for whatever reason. And but
And then he
I
shot
think
his
maybe it was just
cousin.
I think seeing the response of most people to
Yeah.
this. Like I don't have even among people with different um, philosophies and different politics. Like I called home and heard the same thing from people back home in my old neighborhood and among my family members that I heard from people out here. Just in terms of the freedom aspect of it, I just don't know that that's gone yet. I think the politicians will do what they have to do, and they will do what they think is justified. And I sincerely believe they think a lot of what they did was justified and probably saved lives. But I also think that um, I mean, there's still, as long as they don't, and maybe this is a naive view, or maybe this is I'll say ignorant for the lack of a better term, just an ignorant view. As long as they don't suspend the First and Second Amendments because of it, like I feel like the fact that they didn't do that means we're fine. Like we're gonna be fine. We're still in position. Like they had protests, right? People went up there and protested in Michigan, and they protested, and I don't know that anyone stopped that, right?
Are you talking about the protests going on right now?
No. I'm talking about the corona, like the quarantine protests. People protested that stuff, and then some people just openly rebelled. And so if the despondency is just
I didn't think
because
there was. I mean, there were protests. I'm not certain that there was much of it, and I think,
there probably wasn't much of it, but even if it wasn't just that, if it was just being down here and seeing people go to the beach, or there was the sheriff letter, the Orange County sheriff, and most
yeah,
of the
yeah,
sheriffs
he's
in
not
this
going to
area
enforce certain things.
wrote letters, yeah, in terms of like I don't
Well,
think
this is like a
freedom
whole
is
nother conversation, man. Because there's other things to be worried about with stuff like that. So it's like they're not going to enforce certain things. So now you got like these battles between, certain executive and legislative branches. And it's like, eh, and within the executive branch. So it's like, there's like a breakdown. There's a chaos going on that's worrying me more. I mean, look, I don't want to end on negativity stuff. I
Well,
get
that's
where you're
where I was
coming
trying to
from.
steer it towards a positive thing. I because
Yeah, I know. I'm
I'm
sorry.
not.
I'm not seeing it, brother. It's fucking me up, man. What I do see is positive. Here's what I'll say, because we're rounding on 2 hours, and I appreciate everybody who's listening. And
Yeah,
we'll have to have a conversation about like artists and things that like bug Jargal, go deeper into
uh,
those type. I'd love to
yeah,
talk to you about poetry.
yeah.
You're welcome on the show anytime you want to go on the show. I I'm negative. That's just all there is to it. Your positivity I appreciate, and I get from the artist's perspective. There is something profoundly and something profound in isolation that can happen, where you get Wordsworth in Germany when he's trapped with his
Hmm.
sister. I don't know if you know this story, and this is
I've
where he
heard
writes
various
all.
stories about artists and their productivity
Yeah,
doing it.
this is where he writes the Lucy poems, and he writes a whole bunch of even the Prelude, and because he has nowhere to go, he has nothing to read, nothing to distract him, right? So so I get that for creatives, this has probably been a time of like, what can I do with the materials I got? And I get it. I've done that to the best of my ability.
Hmm.
Although I'll be honest and say that I've also felt my laziest in my life since in this moment. I've also felt some of the laziest moments of my life during this quarantine where
Mm,
I just felt like I didn't want to do anything. But
yeah.
that's a topic for another time.
Well, no, I just think
But
that there's definitely different perspectives of it because also I think what kept me, I haven't had any lazy moments, but it's also because I was working the whole time. Like I still had
yeah,
to teach. Yeah, so that kept me in my regular schedule. And I can imagine
that's
if you,
good.
I know some self-employed people. I know one young lady who had to, she had just moved into, she was renting the house, but she basically just moved into the house, and then this whole thing set, and she just made the decision to move back in with her parents, and her business for the most part is just on hold. I can imagine just all kinds of lows. If all I had to do was work on art in here, and I wasn't teaching my students from day to day, honestly, I don't know how much dark I'd be. Honestly, the fact
Students
that
kept you live. I love it.
yeah,
It kept you
and the
bright.
fact
Kept
that
you
they're
bright.
children, it's hard, especially with our students. And I'm not gonna. Well, I'll shamelessly plug Van Dam Academy. They're awesome, but I won't.
They are
I won't.
awesome.
I
I've
won't
met some
sit
of
here
them.
and just gush over students. But it's definitely, as a teacher, this is the only teaching job I've had where no matter how bad a day I'm having, it gets better when I get to school or get around my students. And I've been teaching for going on 15 years now. Uh,
Nice. I love it.
yeah, this is the only school I've done it where I remember there was one day, there've been several days where I've even been awakened from with a terrible phone call from somebody I didn't want to talk to, or something awful had happened and I had to go to work, and I'm just sitting here like thinking before I get to work, how am I gonna put on the right attitude before I walk in this classroom and don't
Yeah.
snap at a kid, and all it takes is the one student walking in and just saying hello, and I'm like, oh, I'm good, yeah, no, I'm gonna be
Yeah.
fine. And I think so. I
I think
think that,
that's wonderful, and I think that's definitely true. Yeah, because I
yeah,
remember that's one of the things when I only taught for a couple of years at Laporte, but I
mhm,
remember it was definitely something that was an emptiness once I did leave that I didn't realize was there. The
mhm,
being more fulfilled by being
mhm,
around these wonderful spirits in a
mhm.
sense, and these balls of
Yes, sir.
energy. But there is a
Yeah,
kind of fulfillment that once it's gone, it's like, oh man, and you still got to keep that. So I definitely agree. That's a profound as well part of
yeah.
your experience that I think maybe brightened your day in a
That
way.
had yeah, I have to give some credit to the fact that I got to teach my all of my classes every day. We almost did not skip a beat, and being able to do that every day at my regular schedule and has made being in quarantine. I can't even imagine what if I if yeah. I'm sure that made all the difference. I think I'd definitely be in a darker mood.
Darker mood without
Won't
those
say how the
kids.
book would have ended, but it would have ended differently. So
Okay, well, don't ruin it because I got like 10 more pages to go or something like that.
yeah,
I'm
man.
gonna finish it right after this.
Sure.
So everybody, you can go to jeremiahcobra.com to buy the book. Where else can they buy the book?
Hold on, what did you say? Jeremiah what, Cobra?
H? Isn't it Jeremiah H?
Well, H is how you spell Jeremiah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Jeremiah Cobra.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
Jeremiah
Jeremiah.
with an H, I should say
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Jeremiah
Yep,
Cobra.com. My apologies.
yep. No, no, no
Um,
problem.
yeah, so you could buy the book there. There you go. It's also been on the
That is,
screen the whole time. So they
that is
got
my name.
that's your
Okay, that's
name.
good.
So yeah, they've seen your name the whole time and it's there.
Awesome.
Go buy the book. And can they get it on Amazon?
You can get it on Amazon. I actually want to state this. It's better for me monetarily if you get it off of my website because
You make
of the
more.
way that, yeah, just because of my inventory. But it costs the same amount. And if you get it on Amazon, the benefit to getting it on my website is that it helps me better. It helps me more financially. The benefit to me for ordering it on Amazon is that you can review it. You'll be a verified reviewer, and I need reviews for the book in order to get more people reading the book, so that people can find it, so that people can trust that is as good as it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing, if I just say so myself. It needs reviews,
Okay.
so review it.
Get some reviews. Okay. We'll try to push some reviews. I might have the Kindle. Yeah, so I didn't buy it. Maybe I'll help you out and buy the Kindle version and do a review on Amazon. That's one way, even if though I'm getting the book and I have the Kindle version already. So I think,
Yeah,
but I agree. Getting reviews from people is hard as
it is.
authors, especially getting
Yeah,
started. But if
yeah,
you want to help people, who like Jeremiah, that is a huge boon. It's very hard to explain how beneficial that is.
no, it's immense. In fact, I should just go on Amazon
Yeah.
because I'm good on money right now. I
Yeah.
need the reviews
Reviews are more
way
important.
more than I need the money. Go on
So buy it
Amazon.
on Amazon,
Let
leave a
them
review.
take half my check. No, I'm just joking. They don't take it. They take a good percentage
They take a
depending on where you
chunk.
get it
Yeah.
from. But whatever. Go on Amazon. I should run a promotion. I need at least 10 reviews.
10 reviews. Okay.
10
Let's go
reviews
for it.
within this week. Let's see
This
if I
week.
can
Okay. Well, we'll
ship
try to get this
push
out
that.
there and tell people and spread the word. So,
Awesome.
well, thank you so much, Jeremiah, for being on the show. And hopefully
Thank
we'll
you
have you
so
back
much.
soon. All right.
Yeah, we got to talk soon.